Take one.
Well, we're happy to be here with Edward William Arnold. It's March 11th, 2017, and we're going to have just a few minutes to get a glimpse of an incredible life. And we'd like to thank you for taking the time to share a little picture of your history and the life that you've lived. And it means a lot to us, so thank you for taking the time to do this. So let's start out. I thought, chronologically, I'd like you to share what are some of your earliest memories?
Well, I can remember going to school when I was 6 years old. In fact, I can remember some of the things that my father had me go with him to do when I was younger than that. When I was about 5 years old, he took me fishing down to the Colorado River. I'd never been fishing before, but he made me a willow with a fishing line on it, a hook. I threw it out into the water, and guess what? I got a fish. I pulled that fish up out of the water and I saw it and I screamed and dropped the pole. He pulled the fish out of the water, and that was my first fishing experience.
Did you eat it for supper?
I don't remember that event, but I do remember when I was 6 years old going to school. We had a two-room schoolhouse. The first 4 grades was in one side of the building, and the other 4 grades up to the 8th grade was in the other side of the building. I remember sitting there in the row for the first graders. And of course, when the 2nd graders and the 3rd graders and the 4th graders got their lessons, I was sitting there listening to the whole thing. So I got 4th grade experience in the 1st grade.
That's why you're so smart, huh?
Sure. Then I can remember events that occurred in 1941 when I was 10 years old. In 1941, they had a broadcast over the radio by the President of the United States, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And he announced the fact that the Japanese had attacked Pearl Harbor. That was a scary event, but life goes on.
So do you remember that experience? Where were you? Do you remember where you were, or just do you have a more vague memory?
I remember we lived in Sloan, Nevada. My father was a foreman on the lime processing plant, and that we had a radio that we always listened to the news every day, and that's the news broadcast that came over from the president. Some of the events that occurred after that were part of the life that we experienced was that they had a military attachment. There was a railroad that went through had a depot in Sloan, and the Union Pacific Railroad had trains that came through there. Were vital supply lines to the coast to bring supplies from the interior of the United States to the coastal ports to go to Japan and to help the war effort as the military people needed supplies. This detachment was housed in a tent, and they guarded a tunnel that the railroad went through, which was just outside of Sloan, Nevada, and that was an experience of having the military involved in the events that were going on in the town. That was kind of interesting and scary.
Mm-hmm. So you were just a young boy, about 10 at that point, 11, 12,
I was 10 years old during that first phase of that Japanese World War II event.
So you remember those things. How did that impact your experience as a young boy? What kind of things did...
Well, it's interesting because shortly thereafter, my father took a position at a war plant called Basic Magnesium Plant, which is now Henderson, Nevada. That war plant had vital products that they manufactured for incendiary bombs. And they were using it to fabricate those bombs. And he was a foreman there also. I have some of the paperwork from the job that he had in my files that shows his position in the organization chart for that war plant. He never was inducted or was invited to go into the Army because of his family situation. He had myself and my sister Mary Jane at the time, and Geraldine had been born by then, and that made him ineligible to be going into the military. I have to take time out because somebody's trying to call me. Oh, Diana is calling me. Sorry, I can't talk to you, Diana. We're in the middle of an interview, and we're going to cut out of this. We're over at the church. You can come here anytime. Thanks.
All right. Are we back on? Okay. Well, all right. So your dad was involved in that, and he was ineligible to go to war.
So he was able to stay there in the plant as a vital employee of the war effort. And we moved from Sloan to what was called Basic, moved into a trailer. That was the accommodations that they set up. They had a big trailer park that they brought all these trailers in, and the people that were working in the war plant lived in the trailer. About that time, my mother decided that she needed to have some religion in my life. So she talked to her brother-in-law in Cedar City, Carl Hayburn. And Carl was active in the church, and so she said, we need to get Eddie, because that's what they called me back in those days. My dad's name was the same as mine, so to differentiate, they called me Eddie. Eddie needs to be baptized, so can you do that? So we went up to Cedar City when I was 11 years old, and I was baptized a member of the church. So that was an interesting experience as far as my life is concerned.
had you been participating in any religious activities up to that point, or not?
Well,
really?
I had my sister and I, Mary Jane. We were neighbors to a family called the Hennies, and they went to Sunday school in Las Vegas. Went to the Methodist church, the Baptist church. They just kind of went to different organizations to see how the church services were. And we'd have to take a few coins to pay for the hat that they, actually a little pan that they passed around to the congregation to collect an offering. So we'd give an offering. And we enjoyed going to that, but it wasn't the same as the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And getting back to the baptism that I experienced when I was 11 years old, I had a distinct impression of the power of the priesthood as they laid their hands on my head and confirmed me member of the church. I could feel the Spirit. and the power that they had in that ordinance. Okay?
Well, that's wonderful. So then you were baptized and you felt that change. How did that impact when you went home from Cedar City then? Was your family participating in religious activities at that point? Was a church available to go to? What was that like for you?
I did begin to attend church regularly. By then, we had moved to, of course, we were in Henderson, a basic magnesium townside. We moved from the trailer into a home. The government brought in prefabricated housing, and they built a town side of housing, and those people that were in important positions or that were supervisory capacity could have a house. So we ended up with a house on, as I recall, Tungsten Street, 266 Tungsten, in Basic, which was then changed name to Henderson, Nevada. And I can remember going to school there, and we went to church. My mother would send us to church. She didn't take us.
So was it just you and Mary Jane that went?
My sister and I would go to church. And I figured out that there was a bowling alley near where the church was. The church was held in a cultural hall of the grade school. They had a gymnasium type building, and the church had rented that building. They didn't have a church building built. So my sister would go to church, and I'd go to the bowling hall and set up pins for 10 cents a line. So I got some spending money, but that didn't last too long. The war finally started to wind down, and my father decided to move the family to Las Vegas. We moved to a subdivision in Las Vegas called the Huntridge subdivision. I don't know why they called it Huntridge, but it must have been the developer that developed the area. And the house that we moved into was on Bracken Street, 1061 Bracken. We lived in that house, and we had a family reunion in Las Vegas a few years ago. And at that family reunion, we went to some of the locations that I can remember from that period of time. We had a really interesting opportunity to participate in the church and, of course, to continue in school. By the time we moved to Las Vegas, I was in the 8th grade in the grammar school, and they had a school that was just a few around the block from our home on Bracken, and that school was called the John S. Park School. It had prefabricated buildings that had been set up during the war for a school because they had population growth. And that's where I attended the part of the 7th grade and all of the 8th grade in my school education. Then, when I graduated from the 8th grade, we had a graduation in a hall in Las Vegas. And the boys from the high school were notorious for kidnapping the new freshman boys, taking them out and hazing them. So we were scared to death that they were going to try to do that with us. And the boys were, at least I was. And so we were very clingy to our parents during the graduation ceremony because we didn't want to be kidnapped by the high school boys and taken out and hazed, which we were successful in avoiding.
Oh, that's good.
what was your family life like? How would you describe your mom and your father, how they raised you, what you learned from them?
Well, my mother was always teaching or talking about being a member of the church and doing church, being active in attending church functions. She would go to those functions and take myself and my sisters, because by then I had 3 sisters. There was Mary Jane, Geraldine, and Nancy. We had a brother that was born just before Geraldine was born. His name was Gerald. He only lived a few days, so he's probably up in the spirit world with my 2 sisters that are passed on, Mary Jane and Nancy, with the rest of the family doing family preparations to be reunited. So we had a lot of activities that we would attend. My father never did, during those years, feel compelled to join the church. He knew a lot of church members, and some of them not living quite the way the church would suggest that you live. And so he said his position in church membership was that if I'm going to be a member of the church, I'm not going to live like those other people are living. I'll do it right. So he never did join the church for many years. We had missionaries that would come to our house and teach him the missionary lessons, group after group of missionaries. He never would take the plunge to get baptized and become a member of the church. But my mother always encouraged us to go to the church, go to church activities, and be involved in mutual. And during those years, the mutual organization met during the week, and so we'd always go to that. That was kind of a social thing as well as a spiritual thing.
So you'd said initially your mother didn't go to church, and then she did. Do you know what changed for her? What got her involved?
I think more than anything it was because of the family and my sisters were young and they needed to be active in church activities, and she was very careful about having each of us baptized. And I can remember when I received the priesthood, when I was 12 years old. I'd only been baptized member of the church for a little over a year, and I was given the opportunity to receive the Aaronic priesthood, and I went to the stake president's house. He gave me an interview, and I can remember an incident as I rode my bicycle, which I had ridden to his house. He lived in a neighborhood. And I can remember riding my bicycle home, and I was weaving back and forth across the highway, and I didn't pay attention. There was a car coming behind me, and he honked his horn at me. It scared me half to death, and I thought I was going to pile up on the bike, but I didn't. That I was so excited about becoming a member of holding the Aaronic priesthood and being a deacon in the Aaronic priesthood. Okay?
Yeah, that's great. So, does anybody else have any questions before we move on to the next phase of life? I didn't know if there's anything specific that somebody wanted to ask him.
I'd just be interested in knowing, how you got along with your sisters. Were you?
They were tyrants. I had to do the dishes every time it was my turn. They wouldn't do the dishes. I had to clean up after the family had various activities.
What were some of your favorite things to do when you were growing up? What entertained you? What did you do for fun?
Well, for fun, I used to go to the movie on Saturday morning at the Huntridge Theater. That was an event of the of the week. In order to be able to afford to do that luxurious thing, I had an activity called mowing lawns with a hand-pushed lawnmower. And so I had that job. Moving back to the time when we lived in during the war, I had a job after I got caught setting pins at the bowling alley and couldn't do that anymore. They told me I could have a paper route. So I had a paper route that every evening I got the Review Journal, folded my papers, put them in a bag, got on my bicycle, and went several blocks in the neighborhood and threw the papers. And then of course I'd have to go around and collect the bill at the end of every month. So that's where I got some spending money. And that's how I got the ability to do stuff, like movies.
You've worked hard from a young age. You learned to work, the importance of working hard.
That was part of the deal.
That's great. So, as you grew older, tell us a little bit as your life went on.
Well, I can tell you, when I was in high school, I was on the tennis team. I played basketball, but I didn't make the high school basketball squad. I was able to play with the young men YMMIA, not young YMMIA, the Young Men's Organization, not a church-affiliated organization, it's a young men's organization. And we played basketball, and we went on a trip down to California and played several teams down there. The coach, I don't remember the team, just the fact that we went down on those events. When I was a junior in high school, I was elected as the treasurer. You know, one of the big events of the year for juniors in high school is the junior prom. So the junior prom, you had to have money collected, dues for members of that class in order to qualify them to be able to attend the junior prom. So they elected me the treasurer, and that kind of started the ball rolling of being in the accounting business, because that was part of the process, accounting for the people who had paid their dues so that they would be qualified to go to the junior prom.
So that was your first real experience with that then, huh?
Yeah.
The financial work. So did that, after high school you went to college, did that happen immediately? How were you able to
Well, when I
transition?
graduated from high school, I graduated in 1949. The 49ers was the class that we graduated in. I graduated in the top 10% of my class. I don't remember how many class members there were, several hundred. I can remember that I was interested in going to business school. One of my best friends, Bob Ashworth, his father was a public accountant, and he was always driving a nice car and lived in a nice house, and I said, that sounds good for me, so I think I'll be one of those accountants too. So I went to business school. My father took me to Los Angeles, and we enrolled me in a school called Woodbury College. It was on 6th Street, almost downtown Los Angeles. We got an apartment, and I had a roommate. Jack Tobler was another graduate from Las Vegas High School that was attending Woodbury College. It was a 2-year college, so I could get a course of, and we used the same textbooks as they used in all of the 4-year colleges for the accounting course of study and the various other classes that we were required to take, like accounting machine, calculators, and how to use the various equipment, typewriters, how to type. So I learned all those things going to business school. Learned how to type on the typewriter. And I was in my second year, starting my second year, and I got a notice from the Selective Service Board. Selective Service Board is where you have to register for the draft. Since we were in the process of winding down the Second World War, they had started an event called the Korean Conflict. And the Korean Conflict required a lot of new people to come into the Army to become gun fodder. So I got this notice that I had to go for a physical examination. The physical examination was in Los Angeles, but I had to leave from Las Vegas on a bus. They took us to Los Angeles. So when I went on the bus, they said, well, this is not going to be too hard, you're just going to have to get a physical to show that you're physically able to do the functions of a soldier, because it was in the Army that they were inducting me. When I was in high school, I had taken some advanced courses. I took advanced algebra, I took physics, I took some other classes that were science-oriented, so I had some background and information. I could read a schematic, I could tell when an item on the schematic represented a capacitor or a resistance, and how to read the resistance codes on the electronic devices. So I had some basic knowledge, and of course physics has all of the natural functions of the laws of nature adjusted into a formula. And so the formula, or the handbook or the textbook that we used in the physics class that I attended when I was in high school, was a textbook that was used in the colleges. So it was interesting because when I was in Los Angeles, I was in the apartment house, and we had a group of guys in the apartment house. Some of them were going to college, and some of them were taking physics. They was using the same textbooks as I used when I was in high school. So I was able to help them learn how to use the formulas that are involved in the natural laws and physics. And that was interesting to me that I'd already had that information when I was in high school. So preparation is important when you're trying to get enough knowledge to do things. Getting back to the Army situation, I was able to pass the physical. They said, you're fit, you'll hear from us. So I went home, I got a job in a service station out at Nellis Air Force Base, pumping gas and doing oil changes and lubes for cars. I was out there for almost 6 months, and I finally got a notice that I was going to have to be inducted. I was going to have to report for induction into the Army. So they loaded a bunch of us on a bus in Las Vegas. We went down to Los Angeles, had another physical, and they checked me out again. Put me on a train, sent me up to Fort Ord, California. Fort Ord was an infantry training base. But before they put us into the infantry training, they said, well, we're going to run some of you guys into class, and you're gonna take some tests to see what you know. So when I got into the tests and they started showing me schematics of resistors and capacitors and electronic information that I had learned when I was taking physics in high school, they said, well, we're not going to let you go into the infantry. You're going to have to go into the Signal Corps, and we're going to send you down to Camp San Luis Obispo. And San Luis Obispo will teach you how to be signal repair. And so that's what they did. They put me on a bus and sent me down to San Luis Obispo. There was a training camp there that I enrolled in. We had basic training. We had 16 weeks of infantry training so that we could fire a rifle and physically know what to do in the event of an attack by the enemy. But we were able to learn electronics. So I had a course in electronics. I ran across the other day some of the notes that I had taken during the course of those classes. We learned physical education, physical training, because they had calisthenics every morning. And I have ran across a book that I have from when I was in the Army of all the different physical training work that we did while I was in the service. Anyway, the long and short of the events of the schooling was, I was there at Camp San Luis Obispo for over a year. I'd been in the service for about 3 months, so for about 15 months of the period of time. And of course, during this time, the Korean conflict was going on, and it was getting really scary over there because the Chinese army joined with the North Korean army and overran the South Korea and almost overwhelmed the American South Korean forces that were trying to fight them off, mostly Americans. And a lot of the guys that went into the service at the time that I did, that went into the infantry, were shipped out to Korea and were what we call cannon fodder.
So how did you feel about, I mean, at that point in time, I know historically we hear of what kind of the environment, sometimes people have felt really like they want to get in and do their part and others not so much. What was your personal feeling about participating in the military service and the war and things were going on in that?
Well, it was interesting because as I went through the process of the schooling that they provided, electronic schooling and radio repair schooling, I learned how to read a schematic and how to identify the issues with electronics. They had a graduation from those courses, and of course I graduated through all the courses that they had, and they were going to assign me to the 4th Army area, as I recall. And they said, well, we're not going to send you overseas right now. We're going to send you back in the 4th Army. The 4th Army was back in the middle of the United States. Louisiana was one of the posts that the 4th Army occupied. Fort Hood, Texas is another place that the 4th Army occupied. The Armored Division was in Fort Hood, Texas. So we were attached to the Fort Hood Armored Division after a brief time in Louisiana and Oklahoma. And I was, before I got those orders, I was told that we could go to a program that they had called Leadership School. which was a 4-month program to check to see if you qualified to be an officer. So I was just a private in the Army. So I asked to be enrolled in that leadership school. The leadership school taught leadership skills and how to march, how to move troops in formation, and be able to move them to places where they could be useful. Anyway, that program made it possible if on graduation, and I was able to complete the program and graduate physically and classroom-wise. And in order to go to officers training school and become a second lieutenant, I'd have to go to another school and sign up for 3 years after the school was finished. I thought, boy, I'm not sure I want to be in the Army. They tell you what to do and when to do it. They tell you where to lay your head and where not to. Anyway, the long and short of it is I decided I didn't want to be an officer. I'd just take my chances, because by this time I'd been in the service almost 1.5 years. And actually it was 1.5 years with some leave that I had accumulated. So I had about 6 months left to go in the service term, or at the end of the conflict. The Korean conflict was winding down by that time. It was 1954, the beginning of 1954, and the opportunity to continue to be in the Army was always present. And they were arguing that the company that we formed that went to Fort Hood, Texas, the radio repair company, was adding different skills, electronic skills, to the group of people that we were forming in the company. And I was chosen as the physical training instructor for the company. So I'd get the whole company out there every morning. We'd do the daily dozen physical exercises, and we'd jog for a few miles to just make sure that we were physically able to do. Of course, there was speculation that I was going to re-enlist and be a career Army person. Never happened. When we had an opportunity, or were trained to be in the field, we went on a field exercise from Fort Hood, Texas to Fort Bragg, North Carolina. Fort Bragg was the 82nd Airborne Division, and we were training to do that. This was when the Korean War was winding down, but the company was going to go to Europe. So I decided I'm through with this Army stuff. It was about, it was about May of, last part of April, first part of May of 1954, and I was given the opportunity to make an early exit from the Army, because during the course of the organization of the company, they didn't have anything for me to do at the company level, so they transferred me up to the battalion level, to the clerical staff at the battalion level. And because I had learned typing in business school, I was up there typing orders and typing various directives from the battalion to the rest of the troops in the battalion, companies and so on. So I knew all the guys that were in that battalion organization. We came back from Fort Bragg, North Carolina, to prepare to complete the organization of the company. they were betting that I was gonna re-enlist. I said, not gonna happen, folks. I'm getting out of here. So I and another fellow from Tucson, Arizona, left from Fort Bragg. Oh, incidentally, all during the time I was in the service, I saved most of the pay that I got each month as a Army sergeant, well, I was Army private first class. I attained the rank of corporal during the process of when we were in maneuvers back in Fort Bragg. Became an NCO, corporal is an NCO. Anyway, I went back to the battalion and says, I want to get out of here. And they got the orders cut, and this fellow, I gave him a ride. I'd saved the money that I had been putting aside, and when I went into the Army, I had a yellow convertible, and a Chevrolet convertible, and had my dad sold that car for me while I was in the Army, and put the money in the bank, and all the money that I saved as a private and a corporal in the Army, I put in the bank. So I bought a car in Texas. It was a black Ford coupe sedan. It was a two-door sedan. And I drove from Texas to Las Vegas through Tucson. I let my friend off in Tucson, and I drove from Tucson back to Las Vegas, and that's how I got out of the Army.
And what were you knew you didn't want to be an Army man, so what did you want to be? How did you make a decision at that point of where you wanted to go with your life? You knew what you didn't want to do. Did you know what you wanted to do?
Are we sure we got time to do all this?
Well, we've got a whole lifetime to cover, so you just...
All right.
Do you want to have a little break for a minute and we can come back?
That's all right, that's all right.
Want to get through the part...
Let me just get back to the part where I met your mother.
Okay.
When I was active in the church before going off to college, going off to business school, I had an opportunity to attend a state conference. One of my best friends was Bob Ashworth. As I mentioned before, his father was one of the models for getting into the accounting profession. As I went back, reflecting on people that I knew in high school years and while I was going to Woodbury College, I had met Romaine and her girlfriend with Bob Ashworth and myself. Bob was anxious to meet and date Patsy Rust, who is the girlfriend of Romaine's that was at conference. So we went out, after the conference was over with, we gave him a ride home. We had Bob Ashworth's uncle's car. We were seniors in high school at the time, as I recall. And we went out to Henderson, where her father was located. He worked at the security office at the Moore plant, and so we went to his mother and father, and Romaine's mother and father, and asked them if we could take the girl to a drive-in movie. Now, back in those days, drive-in movies were okay. It was interesting. And So they said finally, yes, that's okay. So Bob took Pat Rust and I took Romaine, and we went in his parents' car to the drive-in movie. That was the first date that we had.
Do you remember what movie it was?
I don't have a clue.
That doesn't matter. Do you remember who you went with?
I swear. Well, when I got out of the Army, I got home. By that time, my sister, Mary Jane, had graduated from high school and was going to BYU. She kept saying, well, you got to come up to BYU and go to school. You got to come to go to school. So I kind of found out where Romaine was. She was at BYU. She'd gone to Dixie College for 2 years, graduated from Dixie, went up to BYU, and by this time I'd gotten out of the Army, and there we were. She didn't know that I knew that she was there, but I did.
So did she have a little bit of influence on you deciding to go to BYU? Because you knew she was there?
That and the fact that my sister kept insisting that I needed to go to BYU, so I said, well, I'm game for trying this out, let's see. So I had to get a recommend from my bishop, which I did, and so he made it possible for me to enroll at BYU. When at BYU, it was in, let's see, it was probably 1956 January. I went to BYU, and from 1956 until I graduated, that's another story.
Well, that's a good story. Well, do you want to take a break now, and then we can maybe talk a little bit more later about where your life went from BYU and your relationship with your wife and how that evolved into the rest of your life?
I'll just do this. I'll just tell you just a short brief. At BYU, they had organizations called social units. The boys had a social unit. I was in a social unit called the Brigadiers, and they had a way of inducting those people into the social unit, and hazing and doing this and that. I don't go into that. But they had also an activity called, they had exchanges with the girls' social units. Your mother was in this girls' social unit. I don't remember the name of the social unit she was in, but the Brigadiers and her social unit had an activity. It was a dance. And so we got a chance to meet these girls from this social unit. There she was. So she didn't know it, but I knew that she was up there at BYU. And because I'd inquired from my friend Bob Ashworth, who inquired from Pat Rust, and Pat spilled the beans where she was at. So I knew ahead of time where she was. She didn't know that. But we had this social unit activity, so now I got telephone numbers and names. She had a roommate by the name of Willa Brooks, who lived here in St. George when she was going to Dixie College, and they became roommates when they went up to BYU. So I called up on the telephone, and guess who answered the telephone? It was Willa. I said, I wanted to talk to Romaine. She said, oh, she's not here right now. She wanted to talk. So I talked with her a little while. Then I hung up. I wanted to have a date with Romaine. So I called back, and I finally got a hold of her, and she says, well, you called to talk to my roommate. I said, no, I called and your roommate answered the phone. Anyway, the long and short of it is we started dating. And after we started dating, we became very comfortable with one another. And we got to the point where we were dating exclusively, or if she would have a date with someone else, she had a deadline to go home at 11 o'clock with the date from whoever else it was, and at 11 o'clock, then I had a date. And I always had the last date, so I had the last word.
Okay.
That was protecting your territory. So that's the way we did it.
Oh, that's
It was interesting to see how strong-willed she was back in those days, and still is. She's got very firm ideas about things. She's not easy to sway, but we found a way to work it out. We would make the final word on what we were going to do, or what activity we were going to do, would be alternated. One day would be her opportunity to make the final decision, the next day would be mine. So during those courting years before we were actually engaged and married, we made the choices of what we were going to do. If we were going to go to a basketball game or a football game or a dance or whatever activity was going on that was of interest to us, she got to choose one day and I got to choose the other alternate days all the time. So we worked out, that worked out without any problem. So that's how we worked out our relationship. And of course, come Christmas time, I had decided that it was time to make more firm commitments. So I had my dad order a set of wedding engagement ring, and rings came in. So we had a date during the Christmas holidays. We were having Christmas break from school, and I presented a ring to her and asked her to marry me. She says, "Oh, I don't know if I can do that." I says, "Yeah, you can do it." So she finally gave in and accepted the ring, and we set a date, and that's how we got engaged.
So you were engaged at Christmas and married in March.
Right. In March was the end of a term, school term. We had final exams on a Wednesday. Wednesday night we drove to Salt Lake, to the Salt Lake Temple. Her mother and father came to Salt Lake. We were able to get them. My father still had not joined the church at that point. My mother was a member, but he was not a member. My mother didn't have a temple recommend. No temple ceremony for them. So her mother and father got on the train, came to Salt Lake, stayed up in Salt Lake overnight after the ceremony. The next day, we all got in our car, my car. By the way, I'd traded in the Ford coupe, black Ford coupe that I'd bought in Texas and driven to Las Vegas before I came to school, and bought me a Chevrolet Impala. It was a turquoise white Chevrolet Impala.
Nice.
It was a nice new car. And that's what I drove to school when I went to school, because I'd been working.
Mm-hmm.
See, I had 6 months, almost 7 months of work, and I had a little money saved up, so I bought that car. And of course, I had to finish paying it off, and I got it paid off the next summer. So that was the courtship, the marriage. The next day we drove from Salt Lake to Las Vegas. We got a motel in Las Vegas for our honeymoon. Her mom and dad came down to Las Vegas with us. They had home in Henderson, of course. And they had a wedding reception for us that evening over the weekend. I think it was Saturday. They had the wedding reception. And it was at the church right by their house. And then I still had a few credits to get from school, so I had to go back to BYU. She had graduated in the spring of that year, and I had to go through the summer's term to get all the credits that I needed to get my degree. And I finally got those credits that next summer and took a job in California with Arthur Young and Company. We moved into an apartment in Inglewood, California. And that's became our California activity.
And then the family began.
Then we began having a family, and that was awesome.
Well, we can talk more.
Actually, we'd had, I think I had to go that next year to school because we had Greg in the fall of '56. And he was our newborn at the end of '56. Anyway.
All right. Well, let's take a little break and have some lunch, and then we can talk a little bit more about some other things a little bit later, and carry on from there. We've got to a good turning point in your life, so.
All right.
Okay with that?
That's fine.
All right.
What, considering the time, what is
We're
after
running
this?
3 hours
The talent show?
behind.
Talent show's supposed to be at 4:30. 4? Or is it 4? We're doing it
Between 2 and 2:30 is the interview.
4:30 to 5:30, and then
Okay.
dinner's supposed to be at 5:30. So I invited Kim and them to be here at 4:30 for the talent show, hoping their little girls would
There's no piano in the cultural?
do something. There used to be. I didn't look. Wasn't in there, was it?
What?
We can get one
Maybe
easy
we can-
enough.
we
There's one
can-
on the
we
Relief
can
Society,
roll
one
one.
primary.
Yeah, we can roll one in there.
What,
Where
piano?
is
I
it?
might
Where is
have
it? Yeah.
Well, there's one
Should
in the
be in
Relief
that
Society
room.
room, there's one,
Should be in
Oh,
one
maybe-
in the Relief Society, and there should be one
Maybe
in
we
the
could do the talent
police
show on the
district.
Relief side. The chairs are set.
There you go, you can do that.
yeah, just do it in there.
There's
From the
chairs
It's
whole
all
all
set up,
city.
so that'll be good.
Sure.
Okay. All right,
I need to
Parker,
get
are
the
you
soup-
ready?
I need to get
You
the
rolling?
soup on. to
You're
cook.
rolling? Mhm.
So when we do the talent
Ready?
show.
Let's
are we
go.
rolling?
Yep.
All right, well, we,
You want me to
Got-
tell you a little bit about our wedding in
Well-
Salt Lake?
yeah, why don't you tell us about your wedding and, a little
Well,
bit
of
more
course,
about that.
we were in college and we were taking final exams in the morning. Then in the afternoon, after we got our exams finished, we went to Salt Lake and we went into the Salt Lake Temple. And the sealer took us into the sealing room and we had a very special sealing ceremony. Romaine's mother and father were there and we were there, and those were the important people at that
Uncle Bill and
point.
Aunt Lida, because they worked
Bill.
in the temple.
Yeah. Bill and Lyda worked in the temple, and Bill was there. And so that was our big wedding entourage.
And we took out our endowments late January because Mary Jane had suggested take out your endowment and then you won't have to spend so much time on the marriage ceremony. So we thought we were being smart since we had finals and everything. And then as it turned out, Uncle Bill suggested that Mom and Dad needed to go through an endowment session. So we did an endowment. So after taking finals all day, and he went to get a haircut, and then we drove up there, went through the temple, and
Then we went to a restaurant and had
had dinner. It was so tiring. All I remember about getting married and our reception is how tired I was.
Like family reunions.
Oh, it was worse.
It was fun, but what was interesting is we drove down. Brad says, well, you get to have your honeymoon with your in-laws.
Yeah, he says, not everybody gets to take their parents on their honeymoon with them.
So anyway, we got down to Las Vegas, and the fellow that was supposed to be the best man didn't show up. So I had to choose another best man to stand in, because if you've seen the pictures of our wedding reception, I had a white dinner jacket on and bow tie all formaled up. She had a beautiful wedding dress.
I didn't
have a
think it
best
was
man.
beautiful. I thought it was ugly. I had it made and it didn't turn out like I wanted.
But it was beautiful as far as I was concerned. So anyway, we had pictures taken, and the fellow that stood in was what was his name? Anderson. Jim Anderson was from Panguitch. The best man that I was supposed to have there was Jack Tobler. Jack didn't show up. So anyway, we took the pictures, and those pictures didn't get in the archives much. But the ones with your mother and I, they did make it to the archives.
That's what's most important.
So we finished college. She got a degree in elementary education, a teaching certificate, and I got a bachelor's degree in accounting and finance. I got a job offer in Los Angeles with Arthur Young and Company. Arthur Young and Company was one of the 8 largest CPA firms in the country. And so they offered me a great big salary of $450 a month.
We thought we were going to be rich.
We were going to live high off the hog. So we got an apartment in Inglewood.
And I had to go to work.
And she had to go to work. She went to work at Ralph Parsons' company, which is an engineering company, and I was working at Arthur Young. Interesting, the downtown office of Ralph Parsons was just around the block from where Arthur Young had its office in the Mobile Oil Building. So anyway, she'd ride the bus to work and I'd drive the car, because I never knew when I was going to have an assignment in some part of Los Angeles that I'd have to drive to. So I'd go in the office, and unless I had an assignment that was extending more than a few days, I never knew where I was going to end up. But I usually had to start out in the office on 6th Street in Los Angeles, where the offices of the company was. So we stayed in the apartment for 2 or 3 months, and we decided there was a duplex that came available. It was in the same general neighborhood in Inglewood, but it was a little more convenient and a nicer apartment. And the other side of the duplex, my friend Bob Ashworth had enrolled in the master's program at Southern California SC University. He and his wife moved into the duplex next door, and they would watch Greg while Romaine would go to work, and I'd go to my accounting business duties. It didn't last too long there until a few months later we had an opportunity. There was a subdivision out in Granada Hills in the San Fernando Valley, and the subdivision was going to go broke. The lender was selling off all the houses. They were pretty much finished. They didn't have fences, but the houses themselves were finished. The curb and gutter and sidewalk were all in. So we made a good deal and bought a house out in Granada Hills and moved out there. Well, the first thing that happened after we moved into the ward, there was about 1,200 members in that ward, which is about 4 times bigger than most wards are in most days, modern days. But they called me to be the finance clerk. Back in those days, the finance clerk had to prepare all his receipts for the member donations. So I'd gather up all the donation slips and all the information on them, check out the money that's in there, the checks and the currency that was in the financial donations, and make up a deposit, and she'd type up all the receipts for me. They didn't know that she'd been called as
Assistant.
my assistant
Well,
finance clerk.
when we were at the Y, he taught a lab because he'd already had most of the classes, and it was just repeat. And so I used to correct all his papers for his accounting lab too.
I did.
That's how we got your name. When we ran across Sherry Lynn, I said, "Oh, that's what we're going to name our first girl."
It was interesting because the work that I did as an instructor when I was a senior in my last year of college at BYU, I'd teach the regular class 1 day a week, and then 1 day a week they'd always have a lab for the elementary accounting students, so that someone would be there to help them with their questions on their problems and their homework. And then whenever there was an exam, the regular professor, the instructor for that class, would get the exams and he'd give them to me and I'd bring them home. We'd get the key to correct the answers for the tests, for the exams, and she'd correct all the papers. She was a hard worker too.
Well, and you had another job.
I had a job working as an accountant for a real estate company in Provo. They had a lot of accounts receivable, actually notes that they had people do business with them of various kinds, and they created a note for each of the transactions where they owed them money. And I'd have to calculate the interest and the principal part of each of the payments each month and post it to their ledger cards and keep track of all their accounting while I was in school. So we'd have enough money to pay the rent.
Between that and the GI Bill. Yeah, the GI Bill.
Right. And we had the GI Bill while we were going to finish our school at BYU.
Romaine, what was it like for you to just starting out raising a child, and back then what was it like? What did you just day to day? What was your schedule like?
Boys are harder than girls, I think, because they have the capacity to make sprinkles all over the place.
I just have to tell you one of the things that I remember. We lived in a basement apartment when we first got married. And I was depressed all the time because it was so dark and everything. So then we got in an upstairs apartment. And we noticed all this stuff on the ceiling. And I said, "Wow, what's all that up there?" So after we had a baby boy, and I would bathe him and then sit him on the table to dress him, We knew what all that stuff up there was.
There's water, that's what you get.
So
It was funny.
that was one of the interesting aspects of it. The other interesting aspect of it was that the washing machine was in the basement. Well, the basement didn't have an access from the inside of the house. You had to go to the outside of the house to get to the basement. But it did have a trap door and a ladder. So she'd have to take the laundry down the trap door and the ladder to get to the washing machine in the basement to be able to do her laundry.
It's crazy. We lived upstairs and we had to go down in this little hole in the wall to do our laundry.
How much did you pay for rent?
I can't remember what it was, but it was reasonable because we were struggling students. The lady that had the home also had a business. She was a sewing machine store salesperson. Actually, she owned a store. She wanted me to go to work for her, so I went there for a few times. But I didn't know how to sell sewing machines.
She was a seamstress?
So,
What?
The seamstress?
No, she owned a sewing machine, sold
Oh.
sewing machines. So she asked him if he'd like to sell sewing machines and earn some money.
Oh.
But she taught me how to sew, and I made all the baby clothes and stuff for Greg, so we were so poor. And our big treat, when we would get the GI Bill, we would
Check
go get
each
an ice
one.
cream cone. So I says, when we get settled down and making
Oh,
money, we're going to have ice cream all the time. And
We
I've
did.
kept my promise.
That is true.
I stock up on ice cream.
our favorite ice cream when we would have enough to buy a whole gallon of ice cream when we go grocery shopping after the first of the month was cherry nut ice cream.
That was our joke. We gotta go get some cherry nut ice cream. But we lived.
So
We made out a budget and we never bought anything except what was on our grocery list.
well, we used an envelope system for a few years. We wrote down a budget. That didn't work out so well all the time. So we decided we'd do a cash envelope thing. So we'd have an envelope we'd have for groceries and an envelope for what other miscellaneous other stuff, rent. We had an envelope for, so we put the money each month in the envelope, and that's all we had to spend for that particular activity. That was our envelope budget system.
Thank goodness no credit cards.
Well, we got some credit cards right up a few times. Like
Not while we were in college, we didn't have
no,
credit cards.
not while we were in college, but when we got out of college and we were making big money, you know,
Yeah, making big
$450
money.
a month. Well, like compared to $150 a month that we were making for the GI Bill to pay for the books and all the other stuff that we had to pay for. We didn't have any student loan debt or anything like that when we graduated from college. She graduated without any student debt. I graduated without any student debt, so that was, I guess.
Well, I had signed a contract to teach school in Henderson, and when we got married, I had to break my contract because he still had a year of school to go.
So since you brought that up and we're having you together, why don't you tell us a little bit about your experience of kind of, we're still in this era of when you were dating Dad and how you felt about getting married and giving up that contract and all of
Well,
those
I
that
wasn't sure I
time
wanted
about.
to get married.
But when you started, tell us about when you started dating him and when you knew you were in love with him and how that came about for you.
Well, I heard his side of the story already. So
Yeah.
it was about the same. Bob dropped him off at my house, so he took Pat home, and by the way, it was Pat that liked Bob, not Bob that liked Pat.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, you get to correct anything now.
That's right.
Well, I knew there
Anyway.
was some mutual attraction there.
But anyway, so we sat and visited and visited and visited, and I had special feelings for him, but I was just a freshman in high school, and I wasn't really that interested in boys, so didn't really mean. And he had a girlfriend. I think he had a girlfriend by that time. Anyway, he was dating a girl in Las Vegas, and Vegas and Henderson were rival schools, so we didn't really get together until we were in college. I'd see him once in a while, but, you know. And then when he came to college and we had this social activity, dancing, he had a name tag on. Everyone wore name tags. And I said, I used to know an Eddie Arnold. And it was him. And anyway, and so we got to talking, and he had been in the military and developed, whereas in high school he was a skinny young kid, you know. So anyway, then we just kind of got together and ended up just dating each other. And he asked my dad for permission to marry me, and he said, well, how are you going to support her? He says, well, I got the GI Bill, so we thought we were just wonderful. Everything would be okay.
Well, I'd worked 2 jobs during the summer. The summer that I worked after we were married, I had a job working on a survey crew, surveying a highway out by Boulder City, going down to the Boulder Dam, Hoover Dam now. And when I'd get off work, I'd go to work there at 6 o'clock in the morning. I'd get off around 4 o'clock, and 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock I'd start work at a service station, and I'd act as a cashier and pump gas. And in those days, the service station attendant would put the gas in the car and wash the windows and check the tires and do whatever. And this service station used to have an inventory of merchandise in the office, and I'd have to make an inventory of the merchandise every year. And every night at the end of the shift, I'd have to measure the depth or the number of gallons of fuel in each of the big fuel tanks. They'd have a lid that you take off and push a stick to measure, like a yardstick, down into the tank, and I would have to make a record of that. I got so I could make that inventory in about 5 minutes after my shift ended at midnight, because I had to get home, get to bed, because I'd be up at 6 o'clock in the morning to get to work again. It was kind of a long day, but
That was in the summers.
that was the summer after we were married. It was
Long days and short
long
nights,
days
huh?
and short nights. But it worked out. We got enough money to go back to school and pay our tuition and get all the classes that we needed. And the GI Bill held out until we finished school. In fact, I still had some of the GI Bill left when I moved down to Los Angeles. So I enrolled in the master's program at the University of Southern California. I started taking classes in accounting at USC so I could get a master's degree. Everybody says, well, you gotta have a master's degree, you're gonna teach school. I'm not gonna teach school, I'm gonna be a CPA. So I took the CPA exam. I held the CPA exam out in Pasadena at the time. They gave the test twice a year. So as soon as I could establish my residency in California, I signed up to take the CPA exam, studied a class to do preparation for the exam, went to the test out in Pasadena, and this was a huge auditorium with hundreds of people in there. And anyway, the exam results didn't come back until about 3-4 weeks after the exam was held. I was able to pass all but one part of of the exam. The exam was made up of 4 different parts: accounting theory, accounting practice, auditing, and law. And I passed all of them but the auditing one. So I had to take that part of the exam again. They call it, you got a leg if you got 2 or 3 of the parts passed. So I was able to get those parts passed. And finally, I signed up to take the exam again and take the auditing part of it again, because I was in the auditing business. I don't know what I
That's
missed.
ironic that you didn't pass that part.
I don't know why I didn't pass that part. But I did a cram study on the auditing part of the sections and was able to pass it the next time. As soon as I passed it, I said, I don't know why I'm going to USC. We had by this time moved to Granada Hills and was living in the home that we purchased in that subdivision out there. And I said, why am I still going to USC? I don't need to get a master's degree. I'm going to be a CPA. I passed the exam. So I quit going to the classes that they were having, because the classes were always in the evening time, because I was working all day long in the accounting business.
Originally, you said you wanted to be a CPA attorney,
Yeah.
so you decided you weren't going to go.
Well, I looked at the attorneys that I knew, and all the attorneys that I knew were involved in some kind of conflict and arguing about law and arguing about their damages or cases. It was not an adversarial occupation, and I didn't think I wanted to be in an adversarial. Because I liked helping people. I liked helping people make decisions on their taxes so that they could get the best advantage and save the most money that they could save. And so I just kind of dropped the CPA attorney idea.
One of the things you may not know is when he was at BYU, he was chosen as most preferred?
Preferred.
They had to vote on that, and
It's kind of a male beauty contest.
yeah.
You were the most preferred at BYU, huh?
It was one of the most
Most
preferred.
sought after bachelor.
Yeah.
Oh, well, that's neat. Are there any other things that we may not know that you are popping up in your mind as you talk that you can think of?
Just on a personal note, while we were living in California, he had a client that, do you remember, that wanted you to do some dishonest things?
Yeah.
And invite us to their house out in, where did they live? It was along the coast. Anyway, had a big fancy home, but he wanted him to do some things, and he said, I need to take you for a walk. So we went for a walk, and he said, I can't do this. He said, it's something that is against my standards and principles, and even though it's a lot of money and they're offering me a big opportunity, he says, I can't do this. And I said, fine, I wouldn't want you to. So anyway, he turned it down, and I was very proud of him for that. I thought that was nice that he wouldn't jeopardize his standards for money.
It's integrity.
That's great. Well, that kind of brings me to another question that I had for you, which is, you've been through a lot of life's hardships and challenges. We all do. But what do you feel like has helped you navigate those hard decisions and the difficulties and the challenges? What would you attribute your ability to handle them and get through them and
Maybe you could give us an example of maybe some of the hard things that you've gone through and then how you've handled them.
Is your eye just watering, or are you
Do you
crying?
need another tissue, Dad?
My eyes are watering.
Oh.
Their allergies are acting.
Well, for me, it's the faith in God. Sometimes I'd ask myself, maybe I just don't have good sense. I don't recognize it when I'm bad off. I don't know. I just always had a lot of faith and knew where we were headed, you know. So just like now with all this stuff going on, you just think, well, the world's not coming to an end without knowing where we're going. So, and who's in charge. So most of the things have been through prayer and faith and
Well, it's interesting in looking back at our life. I had positions in the church that were very demanding. I was a counselor. Well, first of all, when you go back and view some of the callings that I've had,
always gone. I raised the kids on my own, I have to tell you.
that's what I was doing. I was in situations where I was called on to be in other places or sitting away from my family during regular meeting schedules. I was Elders Quorum president when we were living in Las Vegas. I was called from that position to be a counselor in the bishopric. I was a first counselor to the bishop, and he was a busy man. He was a jeweler, and
Jack Huntington.
Jack Huntington had lots of activities, and whenever there was any kind of an activity during the week or otherwise that he didn't have time to handle, I was his go-to guy. I handled funerals and other various things at church activities. So that was the first, after I was released from that bishopric position, I was called on the High Council in the Las Vegas stake. So I served on the High Council, and I worked with the less active, we called them senior adults back in those days. But we'd go with each of the ward organization leaders and go around and visit the senior inactive members of the priesthood and try to encourage them to come back into activity in the church. When we moved to California, and we haven't gotten to that phase of it yet, but after we moved to California, after the various callings that I'd had in the other stake in Las Vegas, I ended up being called as a finance clerk. I told you they called me to be the finance clerk on the Granada Hills ward when we lived in Granada Hills. Well, in the meantime, we moved back to Las Vegas, and we're in Las Vegas because my friend Bob Ashworth had an opportunity to buy his father's accounting practice. He was a public accounting, as I indicated. And so he said, well, you come back here to Vegas and we'll make a deal and you can pay me out over time for the accounting practice. So Bob Ashworth and I formed a partnership to buy his father's accounting practice. We hired another accountant that I had trained when he got out of college down in Los Angeles. His name was Glenn Sanford. We made Glenn a junior partner. I think Bob and I each owned 40% of the partnership, and Glenn had 30%, as I recall. So there was, or 20%, 25%. Anyway, he had a minor interest in the partnership. So we moved back to Las Vegas. Well, in addition to him selling his accounting practice to us, he decided we needed a place to live, so he says, well, I'm building a new house, you can buy my house and
So we bought his house.
It was his house,
Right, we bought Don Ashford's
Don
house.
Ashworth's house. So we bought his house on Norman Street. Wasn't it Norman Street that we lived on?
Yes.
I think so.
1106?
1106 Norman.
Norman. You remember that?
And who lived next door?
And Gloria Pinion, the
Pinion.
Pinion family lived next door. Sherry's lifelong friends.
And her father had been friends with your uncle.
Right, with Grandpa Arnold's brother
Brother,
when he was killed in a car accident.
right. And I, just as a side note on family history, I was looking at the death certificate that I found for Albert. That was my father's brother's name. He was younger than my father. He was actually living and was married to a girl by the name of Zelma Ney. Zelma came from the Moapa Valley. Her family came from LDS stock, but she wasn't very active in the church. And Albert was he was a party guy. He was driving home from Las Vegas, 12 and a half miles outside of Las Vegas, going towards Sloan. Actually, he lived in Big Springs, but he was in an accident with a truck, had a concussion. The death certificate said that it was unavoidable and he passed away. The date of the accident was October 27th, 1939. On the death certificate, Zelma had put down on the death certificate that his father's name was E.W. Arnold. Well, E.W. Arnold happened to be my father's name. It wasn't Al's father's name. Al's father's name was W.E. Arnold. And so the death certificate has an error on it. And what was interesting is that my father's signature was on the death certificate because they evidently had asked him what his birthday was, and he had to sign the death certificate. And the information on the death certificate, of course, is incorrect because his father's name is Albert's father's name is William Edward.
Darlene was born in Las Vegas. Greg was born in Provo. And then Sherry, Elizabeth, and Diana were all born when we lived in Granada Hill.
Right.
And I was working when I was pregnant with Sherry, and we were required to wear high heels. It was a dress standard. We had to wear dresses and high heels. And I tripped on some stairs and fell and almost lost Sherry. And the doctor said, well, I'll give you a shot, but Mother Nature will just have to take. So we were glad we didn't. lose her.
Gave me drugs. Saved your life.
Tried to.
Well, I guess I turned out okay.
Pretty smart, so it might have helped you.
Yeah, maybe it stimulated the brain cells.
Yeah. Gave you some extra push.
Yeah.
Well, what's interesting is I was called into to be a finance clerk in the stake in the San Fernando Valley. And this is before we moved to Las Vegas. And then when we ended up moving back to California, we moved to Tarzana, which was just across the valley from Granada Hills. And we were able to be called to be on the High Council. I was the High Counselor for the missionaries and the buildings and the training of teachers, new teacher development program that they developed at that time. So we were we were in Tarzana for a few years, and our firm in California that had offered me a position in their Beverly Hills office offered to let me transfer to the Orange County office and become the officer or the partner in charge of the office, which we ultimately agreed to. So I've been on the High Council in Las Vegas. I've been on the High Council in San Fernando Valley when we lived in Tarzana. So I got called to be on the High Council again, actually 2 different times in Orange County. And in between that, I was called to be a counselor, first counselor in the bishopric, when Lynn Radford was called to be the bishop in Orange County. And then all this time, Romaine's raising a family for us because I'm off doing meetings in other buildings in the state because the other buildings in the state.
Well, that was just on Sunday. During the week, you were working late nights, so
Well, here's what was
you were
going
never
on.
home during the week
I was hardly ever going home during the week because we were trying to start a new business, an accounting business out in the San Fernando Valley and then down in Orange County. And so I was working nights so that I could pay our bills.
Well, we had 7 kids, so he was home once in a while. Paul was born when we were in Tarzana, and Kathy was born when we moved to Orange County.
And Mom also had her church callings.
Yes. She all during the course of this, she was primary president. She's a Relief Society president. She's Young Women's president. And then she was a teacher to my maids and Laurels
I was state primary president when we were in Orange
and
County.
Orange County.
In fact, it was funny because when I was primary president? Yeah. Or Relief Society president. Anyway, they divided our ward, and Bishop Binkley's wife was Relief Society president.
Yeah, she said
In that
she has to
ward.
be released.
And when we were made part of his ward, he said, well, we want you to be the Relief Society president of our ward because we hear the Relief Society president of our ward sleeps with the bishop. And that was his reasoning. I thought that was cute.
That was kind of a plus. Let's see, what else can we talk
Well,
about?
lucky you had your second child was a girl to help raise all those kids.
I know.
Yeah, 'cause all
It's
I
good
wanted
I
to do
had
was
some
get
good kids in the beginning, right?
Yeah.
I don't blame you. I would have done the same thing. My first memory was the house in Granada Hills. I remember you walking me to kindergarten. And that was where I first remembered our family.
I know, and I cried all the way. My baby's going to school. I cried when you went on your mission too. I couldn't stand it.
Child thing, huh?
I was attached to him.
That's good.
That was pretty good.
Yeah.
Well, you have, there's lots of stories we'd love to hear more about, but while you're talking about your children, and you're both here together, why don't you tell us what each of you would like your posterity to know? What is something that you could share about what's most important, what you've learned through your life is most important to you, and you would like your children to know, and your posterity?
Go ahead.
We want your counsel, so this is your chance. We're giving you a chance to give the counsel that you'd like them.
For me, I want them all to be together with me in heaven. I just want
Well, there's
the
one
eternal
thing that
family.
that is important, and that is family. Jeff Holland was here in this building several months ago. He stood at the pulpit at a funeral and he said, "There's 3 things that you get to take with you out of this life, and there are only 3 things. One is the knowledge that you have gained while you're in this life. It's of eternal nature. Second is the ordinances that you are able to receive and participate in that will have an eternal consequence. And the third, I remember the third, it's your family. Your family is the third thing that you get to take with you in the next life. So one of the blessings of being married in the Salt Lake Temple as we were beginning our family is the fact that all of our children were born in the covenant. What that means to me is Heavenly Father has covenanted with us that we will have our family with us. Whatever we need to do, we can do. Because the sealing ordinance is in effect. It will be throughout eternity.
So the message is love your family. No matter what. We all have a free agency. We were all sent here to be tested and tried and make choices. And sometimes we make mistakes, but we just need to love each other, and that's why family reunions are so important. It's so we can renew that love and renew the feeling that we're loved. So we just love having our family around and love each one of you.
So will you, on that note, share with us your testimony, not just about the family, but just we'd like to record your personal testimony.
I wrote my testimony down. You can get a copy out there.
You should have known the answer to that question.
My version is good.
Yeah, but
though.
reading it is a little different than seeing you.
Yeah, my
And
version
feeling-
is good.
Your words.
We'll let your dad tell his testimony because he didn't write it down. I have a testimony, and I went to a funeral last week, and she was a girl that had never married, and her niece read her testimony as part of the funeral service. And I was so impressed. I thought, this is something I want to have my posterity to know, is that I have a testimony. And so I actually got on the computer and realized I had written it back in 1995. So I just added a little bit on the end, and I thought, I'm going to hand this out at the reunion. So we must have been on the same spiritual tune. And I thought, if each of my kids want a copy of my testimony, I want them to have it so they know I have a testimony, that I know the church is true, and I'm so grateful for my membership in the church. But I can't bear my testimony without crying, so that's it. You gotta read it.
That's all you're getting. Of the up, live, and personal.
Your turn.
Well, one of the things that I left out of some of the callings that I've had that took me away from family life somewhat was I was called to teach early morning seminary for 4 years. After the first 2 years as stake president, who at that time was DeMar Barron, interviewed me and said, well, do you want to continue teaching or you want to get out of this job? Because we were teaching at 6 o'clock in the morning till almost 7 o'clock, early morning seminary classes, 5 days a week. I got paid money for it, you know.
But he spent it all on buying donuts for the kids.
Every Friday. Every Friday we went and got donuts at the
Friday
donut
we
shop.
went and got donuts for the class because Friday was scripture mastery day for one thing, and donut day for reward for being there. Anyway, one of the things that came up was I was preparing for one of the years that I was teaching early on in the early morning seminary, was the fact, and the other fact is I told the stake president that I wanted to teach for 4 years because I needed to study
All the different,
all the standard works, the Old Testament, the New Testament, Book of Mormon, the Doctrine and Covenants, and Pearl of Great Price. Those are the 4 years study program for the seminary program. And I said, I learn more and get more out of the teaching of that class than the students do. Was the fact that before I begin my day, I've had personal prayer. I've had teacher's prayer and teacher's preparation meeting for seminary. I've had an opening prayer and a closing prayer during seminary. I've had family prayer. For the family, with the family, before we all go off to school and to work, there are various activities. I says, you can't be any better prepared for life than that,
for your day.
for every day.
Plus you got up and ran in the morning before you went to seminary. I loved it.
You only got
What a great way to start the morning.
Anyway, I believe that the church is true, that the doctrines of the church are founded upon eternal principles, that they were received by Joseph Smith as he was instructed by the Lord to go through the Bible and make revisions to the Bible, that if you look at the dates, that those various revelations in the Doctrine and Covenants are recorded. And I have copies of the originals of those documents, and the Joseph Smith papers that we have in volumes. The church is true. It is the only church on the earth that has the priesthood authority because the priesthood was restored. It has the only church that has the ordinances that are essential for salvation because they were restored to the prophet Joseph Smith and were passed on to each of the prophets and apostles that are in our day. The prophet of our day has direct revelation from the Lord as to what he's supposed to be doing and what he's supposed to tell the people and what people are supposed to be doing with their lives. The Doctrine and Covenants, section 137 and 138, were added about the time that I was teaching seminary. One of the triple combinations, the Book of Mormon, Pearl of Great Price, and Doctrine and Covenants books that I have, I gave to Michael here a few weeks ago, because I had retired it, because the section 137 and 138 of the Doctrine and Covenants was not included in there. Those sections tell about the experience that the Prophet Joseph Smith and Joseph Fielding Smith, I think it was Joseph Fielding Smith, had, and the revelations that they received directly from the Lord. Those revelations were added and are included in the Doctrine and Covenants and the scriptures that you have today that are published since about 1975. I believe that those scriptures clearly describe what happens in the spirit world and how those that have strayed from the doctrines of the church will have to pay the price, that if they had corrected the lifestyle that they have adopted in this life, could have been changed through repentance and through the receiving of the forgiveness through the atonement of Jesus Christ. And it would have been much easier, but they'll be able to do it in the next life, and it's not, all is not lost. And that's my belief in my testimony of the church, and I leave it with you and my family. In the name of Jesus Christ, amen.
Amen.
I have to tell you that Sage talked to me last Sunday, and she had 3 pages of questions that she asked me.
Oh, really?
And I said, "Where did you get all these questions?" And she says, "I got on the internet."
Sage, how cute.
I know, it was so funny. She kept asking and asking. She had a little notebook, and I said, "My gosh, where'd you get all these questions?"
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's
What were the
great.
questions?
Oh, everything.
All kinds.
What's your favorite
Go
color?
ahead. You'll find them.
There you go. So we'll have to get a transcript from Sage.
Without the internet. How did
Yeah.
we survive?
Do you have any?
One station.
Still,
I don't like that one.
just one last question, I think, before we kind of wrap up this section anyway, is can you tell me if you would like to be remembered a certain way or in a certain light, how would you like to be remembered, or how would you like people to think of you when you're no longer with us? What would you like people to remember about you?
I wasn't so bad after all.
See what happened was.
Takes after his mother.
Yep. Oh, yeah. And Mom, what about you?
I just want everyone to know I love them.
We know,
That's Jennifer Sandwich.
and we love you.
Each one is special. So, sorry. That's why I don't bear my testimony. I get too emotional.
But truthfully, which one's your favorite?
What?
Which one's your favorite for the record?
I think the
There's always
cameras
a
are being
favorite.
turned off right now.
Each one is favorite in their own special way.
Yeah.
Each one has special qualities and things that I love.
You
No
can take the
matter.
second one Sunday because you're lying now. You take the second one Sunday because you're lying now.
At this girl's funeral, her she had a colored boy that she had more or less adopted and helped him get out of the ghetto in LA. And he's a coach here at one of the high school. And he said, "I just want you to know that I was Danielle's favorite." And then her brother gets up and he says, "Well, I'm sorry, Chris, but I was really her favorite." And that kept going on, and I thought, everybody thinks they're their favorite. It's like Jen's dad. All his grandkids think they're their favorite. Well, you're all my favorite.
Good answer.
I can live with that.
That's a good way to be. Well,
Thank
thank
you.
you. We love you. And we're grateful to hear a few of your stories, and I think we'll take a little break and then maybe do a little bit more later and get a little more from Mom. And I think we have a lot more to learn, and we want to keep doing it. So
Yep.
We're not done. We're just gonna take a break for a little while.
I think it's good to do it each year too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we wanna
Just
hear
add
more.
to it.
Really, we want to hear more about ourselves.
Yeah,
From
cause
you.
we're
Well, let me just give you one thing that I've observed.
Very carefully.
Wait. We get one more thing that he observed.
For the record,
It's been easier for the ones that have gone on missions to live the gospel than it is for the ones that haven't gone on missions. Because the missions seem to provide some foundation for spiritual things. Not that those that didn't go on missions don't have spiritual aspects, but they seem to have the ability to withstand the storms. If they've had the spiritual experiences the mission brings to you. Your mother and I didn't have an opportunity to go on a mission individually before we were married. And after we were married, we were raising a family and didn't have time to go on a mission and take a family with us. But we were able to go serve a mission with the Latino people. We've invited a Latino family. They were not part of the families that we taught when we were on our mission. But we've had contact with some of the families that we met while we were serving our mission, teaching English to the Latino people, because they have a struggle with trying to learn English. We did enjoy the opportunity to teach the gospel to them. One of the families we used to teach, we started them reading the Book of Mormon. We got through 1st and 2nd Nephi in the first part of the Book of Mormon with them, and they loved every time that we'd go to teach them English. One of the last things that we did before we'd leave their home is we'd read the Book of Mormon. So I can suggest to you that if you want to find a way to be more spiritual in your life, read the Book of Mormon. It'll give you that spiritual uplift.
That's good advice. We need everybody to work on the quilts so we can get them done before nighttime.
All right.
It should be done by the time we're done with this interview. If not, then everyone's slackers out there.
I did see people.
Because I think the people in here
As the main workers.
I guess
were
we
there.
did. Since we didn't do anything, those are those little notes that I wrote out.
We're not done.
Well, these are just for me.
Oh,
Just because she was going to interview me and she says, "Oh, I'm just going to let you talk." And so I thought I better write down some things because my mind goes blank when I'm.
there's still more interviewing that's going to go on.
Are we gonna?
I don't know if we're gonna have time.
I don't think so. We're supposed to have dinner at 5:30.
I'm asking because I needed
Yeah,
to
so we-
be in charge.
Yeah, I don't know.
It's almost
Sherry,
4
so are
o'clock
we
now.
gonna just continue next time?
Yeah, next
Next year.
reunion.
Probably. Okay, so pack up the equipment and let's move the chairs back. So we're done.
I think that's-
That's a good start.
Where did these go?
In the foyer over here. We get
Who's gonna
The
wanna
big, strong
sit
boys
around
to
the
do it.
table with all this stuff?
Thank you.
We are.